Once you understand this about women, you will stop trying so hard to be attractive. You will stop chasing. You will stop over-explaining yourself. You will stop wondering whether she likes you. And most importantly, you will stop giving away your power before the relationship has even begun. Because one of the biggest mistakes men make with women is that they focus on what they should say, what they should text, how they should dress, how quickly they should respond, how much attention they should give, and how they can make themselves more desirable. But they are looking in the wrong direction. The real question is not, how do I make her want me? The real question is, what is happening psychologically between us? Because attraction is rarely just about the words coming out of your mouth. It is about what the other person experiences when they are around you. And that is a much deeper game. I think one of the most important things to understand about human relationships is that people are constantly communicating things that they don't consciously realize they're communicating. You walk into a room, and before you say anything, people have already formed impressions of you. They notice your energy. They notice whether you're nervous. They notice whether you're trying to impress them. They notice whether you're comfortable with yourself. And women, like men, are extremely sensitive to these signals. A man can say all the right words and still communicate insecurity. He can say, I'm confident, but if he's constantly looking for approval, she doesn't hear confidence. She experiences insecurity. And that's where a lot of men become confused. They think attraction is created by saying the perfect thing. It isn't. Words matter. But the emotional experience underneath the words matters much more. Think about someone who is genuinely confident. They don't have to announce it. They don't have to convince you. They don't constantly tell you how successful they are, how many women want them, how important they are. You simply feel it. There's something relaxed about them. They're not desperate for a particular reaction. And that quality is powerful because it communicates something very simple. I am comfortable being myself. Now compare that with someone who is constantly asking himself, does she like me? Did I say the wrong thing? Why hasn't she texted me? Should I wait 3 hours before responding? Was that emoji a mistake? The problem isn't that he cares. The problem is that his attention has completely turned inward. He's no longer experiencing the woman in front of him. He's experiencing his own anxiety, and people can feel that. You become less interested in discovering who she is and more interested in controlling what she thinks about you. And that's exactly where connection begins to disappear. One of the most seductive qualities a person can have is genuine attention. Think about how rare it is. Most people don't really listen anymore. They're waiting for their opportunity to speak. They're thinking about what they're going to say next. They're checking their phones. They're comparing themselves. They're trying to appear interesting. So when someone actually listens to you, something unusual happens. You feel seen, you feel understood, and being understood can create a much stronger bond than being impressed. This is why I think one of the greatest mistakes men make is trying to impress women instead of trying to understand them. If you're trying to impress her, your attention is on yourself. If you're trying to understand her, your attention is on her. Those are two completely different psychological states. And she can feel the difference. You don't need to interrogate someone. You don't need to ask 50 questions. You don't need to perform some pickup technique. You simply become curious. What does she care about? What makes her angry? What makes her laugh? What did she dream about when she was younger? What kind of experiences shaped her? What does she value? What does she secretly fear? What does she get excited about that nobody else seems to understand? And then you listen. Really listen, because later when you remember something she told you several hours ago or even several weeks ago, you're communicating something without saying it directly. I noticed you. I remember you. Your words mattered to me. That can be extraordinarily powerful. But there's another side to this that men often misunderstand. Being interested in a woman does not mean making her the center of your universe. In fact, the moment you make another person the center of your universe, you can begin to lose yourself. And that is one of the most dangerous mistakes a man can make. You meet someone, You're fascinated. You begin texting constantly. You cancel your plans. You stop working on your goals. You think about her all day. Her response determines your mood. If she texts, you're happy. If she doesn't, you're miserable. And eventually, you're no longer pursuing a relationship. You're pursuing reassurance. That's very different. A healthy attraction should expand your life, not replace it. You should still have your work, your friends, your interests, your ambitions, your solitude, your purpose, because one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess is a life that already has meaning. If you have nothing going on internally, you become dependent on another person to give you emotional stimulation. And dependency creates pressure. Pressure destroys spontaneity, and when spontaneity disappears, attraction often disappears with it. This is why I think independence is misunderstood. Independence doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It doesn't mean ignoring someone to make them chase you. It doesn't mean playing childish games. It means you care without abandoning yourself. You can love somebody deeply and still have your own center. You can want someone without needing them. There is a profound psychological difference between those two things. And women aren't the only ones who respond to it. Men do too. We all tend to value something more when we sense that it has its own existence outside of us. Think about art. You don't admire a painting because it desperately wants you to like it. You admire it because it exists on its own terms. The same is true of a person. There is something compelling about someone who doesn't need to perform for approval. Now, this doesn't mean you should become cold. That's another mistake. Some men hear these ideas and think, okay, so I should stop caring. Oh, no, that's not confidence. That's emotional avoidance. The goal is not to become indifferent. The goal is to become emotionally grounded. There is a huge difference between saying, I don't need anyone, and saying, I would love to have you in my life, but I don't need to betray myself to keep you there. The second is strength. And that brings us to one of the most important things about understanding women. You cannot understand another person if you're constantly trying to make them fit your expectations. Women are not a single psychological category. There isn't one trick that works on every woman. There isn't one sentence that unlocks attraction. There isn't some secret button. Every person is different. And that's actually good news because it means your goal shouldn't be to memorize tactics. Your goal should be to develop perception, observe, listen, pay attention, learn to notice contradictions. Someone may say one thing and behave differently. Someone may be extremely confident publicly, but deeply insecure privately. Someone may say they want excitement, but actually crave stability. Someone may say they want independence, but also deeply value emotional closeness. Human beings are complicated. You are complicated. I'm complicated. So why would we expect relationships to be simple? One of the greatest psychological errors is reducing another person to a formula. The moment you think you've completely figured someone out, you've stopped seeing them. And that's when you begin projecting your own assumptions onto them. You aren't talking to her anymore. You're talking to your idea of her. And that is dangerous because your idea may have nothing to do with reality. This is also why rejection is so important. Most men are terrified of rejection because they interpret it as a judgment of their worth. But rejection doesn't necessarily mean you're unattractive. It doesn't mean you're inadequate. It doesn't mean you've failed. It means there isn't a mutual connection. That's all. And if you can emotionally survive that, you become much freer. Because the man who is terrified of rejection will constantly modify himself. He'll say things he doesn't believe. He'll pretend to like things he doesn't like. He'll hide his opinions. He'll become whatever he thinks she wants. And eventually he may get the relationship. But she isn't actually relating to him. She's relating to a performance. And maintaining a performance for years is exhausting. Eventually the real person appears. And then everyone wonders what happened. This is why authenticity is not just some nice moral principle. It's practical. If you're genuinely yourself from the beginning, you filter people naturally. Some will like you, some won't. And that's exactly what you want. Because the purpose of attraction isn't to convince everyone to want you. It's to discover who genuinely responds to who you are. That requires courage. And courage is attractive because it communicates that you can tolerate uncertainty. You can tolerate the possibility of hearing no. You can tolerate not knowing exactly what another person thinks. You can tolerate vulnerability, and vulnerability is another thing men often misunderstand. They think vulnerability means weakness. It doesn't. Weakness is being unable to control yourself. Vulnerability is allowing someone to see something real about you while still maintaining your center. There's a difference. You can say, I really enjoyed being with you. That's vulnerable. You don't need to say, please tell me you feel the same way because I don't know what I'll do if you don't. That's dependency. You can express affection without demanding reassurance. You can show interest without demanding reciprocity. You can love without possessing. And this is where relationships become much more sophisticated because ultimately the deepest attraction isn't created by control, it's created by freedom. Two people choosing each other freely, not because one manipulated the other, not because one was afraid of being alone, not because one needed validation, but because both people looked at the other person and thought, my life is good, and somehow with you in it, it becomes even better. That's very different from, I need you to make my life good. The second creates pressure. The first creates partnership. And if you understand that distinction, you will stop making one of the biggest mistakes in modern dating. You will stop chasing the outcome. You will start paying attention to the process. You will stop asking, how do I make her fall for me? And start asking, do we actually connect? You will stop asking, how do I make her miss me? And start asking, does she naturally want to be around me? You will stop thinking, what technique should I use? And start thinking, what is this person actually telling me? That's a profound shift. Because when you stop trying to control the other person, you can finally see them. And when you can see them, you can make better decisions. Now, there's another quality that I think is extremely important, and that's playfulness. Seduction without playfulness becomes negotiation. Everything becomes serious. What are we? Where is this going? Why didn't you call? Why did you like his picture? Do you still like me? You can suffocate a relationship with constant analysis. Playfulness creates space, humor, curiosity, surprise, a little unpredictability, not manipulation, not games, just life. Because attraction has an element of discovery, you should know everything about someone immediately. You should allow a person to unfold. And this is one reason mystery can be powerful. Mystery doesn't mean hiding important information. It means you don't reveal your entire psychological universe in the first conversation. You allow someone to discover you gradually. You have layers. You have interests. You have experiences. You have thoughts that haven't all been explained yet. And the same should be true of her. You don't need to extract everything from her immediately. Let curiosity do some of the work. Because when everything is immediately available, there is nothing left to discover. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: never confuse attention with love. Someone can give you enormous attention and still not be capable of giving you a healthy relationship. Someone can desire you and still not respect you. Someone can be fascinated by you and still be completely wrong for you. This is where many people get trapped. They think, she wants me, therefore this must be good. No, desire and compatibility are different things. Chemistry and character are different things. Excitement and intimacy are different things. You need to learn to distinguish them. A person can make your heart race and still destroy your peace. A person can be incredibly attractive and completely incompatible with your values. And sometimes the most addictive relationships are not the healthiest ones. They're the ones where you're constantly uncertain. One day you're receiving enormous affection. The next day you're ignored. Then affection returns. Then distance. And your brain becomes obsessed with solving the mystery. You think you're in love. Sometimes you're actually addicted to unpredictability. That's why emotional stability matters. Don't just ask yourself, how strongly do I feel? Ask, how do I feel around this person? Do you feel more yourself or less yourself? Do you become more creative, more confident, more generous, more alive? Or do you become anxious, obsessive, jealous, and afraid? Your emotions are information, not always truth, but information. Pay attention. And this brings me back to something I think is much larger than seduction, your life's task. Because if you don't have a direction in your own life, relationships can become a substitute for purpose. You start expecting another person to give you the meaning you haven't created for yourself, and that's an enormous burden to place on another human being. I believe everyone has something unique inside them, something they were naturally drawn toward before society began telling them what they should become. When you were young, there were things that fascinated you for no obvious reason. You could spend hours doing them. You didn't need anyone to motivate you. You didn't need a reward. You were simply absorbed. For one person, it was music. For another, it was drawing. For another, it was building things. For another, it was talking to people. For another, it was reading. For another, it was animals. For another, it was mathematics. Those early impulses can tell you something because they existed before you learned what was considered prestigious, before you learned what would make money, before you learned what would impress your parents, before you learned what society expected. And then something happens. You get older. People start telling you what you should become. You should become a doctor. You should become a lawyer. You should get a safe job. You should make money. You should marry this type of person. You should live this kind of life. And slowly, the voice inside you becomes quieter. Then one day you're successful on paper and miserable internally. You have the career, you have the money, you have the relationship, but something doesn't fit and you don't know why. I think that is one of the great tragedies of modern life. People become extremely good at achieving goals they never actually chose, and then they wonder why achievement doesn't make them happy. This connects directly to relationships. Because if you don't know who you are, you become incredibly vulnerable to whoever you're attracted to. You start changing yourself around them. You abandon your interests. You adopt their interests. You start living inside their world. And eventually you wake up and realize, I don't even know who I am anymore. Don't do that. Love should reveal more of you, not erase you. The right relationship doesn't require you to become smaller. It gives you room to become larger. And perhaps that's the real secret. Understanding women isn't really about learning women. It's about learning people. And to understand people, you first have to understand yourself. You have to understand your insecurities, your desires, your fears, your patterns, the kind of attention you're addicted to, the kind of rejection you can't tolerate, the things you pretend not to care about, the things you secretly desperately want. Because you cannot see another person clearly when you're constantly projecting your own unresolved needs onto them. If you're desperately lonely, every attractive person looks like salvation. If you're insecure, every delayed text looks like rejection. If you're afraid of abandonment, every bit of distance feels like betrayal. If you crave validation, every compliment becomes addictive. So the deeper work isn't, how do I become irresistible? The deeper work is, why am I so desperate to be chosen? That's a much harder question, but it's also a much more powerful one because once you answer it, you don't need to chase approval in the same way. You can walk into a room and simply be there. You can talk to a woman and actually listen. You can flirt without needing an outcome. You can express interest without fear. You can accept rejection without collapsing. You can love without possessing. And you can walk away when something isn't right. That is what real power looks like. Not controlling someone else, controlling yourself. And I think that's the point most people miss when they talk about seduction and power. The ultimate form of power isn't making someone do what you want. It's becoming someone who doesn't need to force anything. You become so grounded in yourself that you can accept reality. If she wants you, wonderful. If she doesn't, you continue your life. If the relationship works, you invest. If it doesn't, you learn. You don't destroy yourself trying to make something happen that isn't naturally there. Because there is something very seductive about a person who can say, I want you, but I will not lose myself to have you. That sentence contains freedom, and freedom is one of the most attractive qualities a human being can possess. So once you understand this about women, you'll never lose again. Not because every woman will want you, not because you'll suddenly have some magical power over attraction, but because you will finally understand what you were actually trying to win. You weren't trying to win a woman. You were trying to win yourself, your confidence, your purpose, your emotional independence, your ability to connect, your ability to walk away, and your ability to love without disappearing inside another person. Once you have those things, rejection doesn't destroy you, attention doesn't intoxicate you, desire doesn't control you, and love doesn't make you weak. It makes you more human. And perhaps that's the real mastery of seduction, not learning how to make someone fall for you, but becoming the kind of person who can enter another person's world deeply, honestly, and freely while never abandoning your own. There is another level to this that most people never reach. You can understand attraction, you can understand confidence, you can understand attention, you can even understand the psychology of relationships. But if you don't understand emotional patterns, you will still make the same mistakes because people rarely react only to what is happening in the present. They react to what the present reminds them of. A woman may become distant because she is losing interest, or she may become distant because intimacy makes her uncomfortable, or because she has been hurt before, or because she doesn't trust you yet, or because she simply needs space. The behavior may look identical from the outside, but the psychology underneath it can be completely different. And this is why assumptions are so dangerous. A man sees a woman becoming quieter and immediately thinks she's losing interest, so he starts chasing. He sends more messages. He asks what's wrong. He tries harder. He becomes more available. And ironically, the pressure he creates may produce exactly the distance he was afraid of. This is what happens when anxiety interprets reality. You don't respond to what is actually happening. You respond to what you fear is happening. That's an enormous distinction. And I think one of the most important qualities in relationships is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. You don't always know. You don't know what someone is thinking. You don't know how they feel. You don't know where the relationship is going, and you don't need to know immediately. The insecure person needs certainty. The mature person can tolerate ambiguity. That's why patience is so powerful. You don't have to force every emotion into a conversation. Sometimes you need to watch, you need to observe, you need to let someone's behavior reveal itself over time because words can be rehearsed. Behavior is much harder to maintain. Someone can tell you, I really care about you. But then you watch how they treat you when they're angry, how they treat you when you disagree, how they behave when they don't get what they want, how they treat people who can't give them anything. That's where character reveals itself. And this is another thing men often overlook. They're so fascinated by whether a woman is attracted to them that they forget to ask whether they actually admire her. They ask, how do I get her? Instead of, do I even want her? That's a profound psychological mistake because attraction can temporarily blind you to incompatibility. You can become so focused on winning someone that you never stop to evaluate whether being with them would actually make your life better. And sometimes the person you are desperately trying to impress is exactly the person you should be walking away from. That's not failure, that's perception. One of the great signs of maturity is being able to distinguish between desire and direction. You can desire something that isn't good for you. You can be attracted to someone who is destructive. You can crave attention from someone who doesn't respect you. You can miss someone who made you miserable. The intensity of an emotion doesn't prove the quality of the relationship. Remember that, because sometimes people think, but I feel so strongly about her. Yeah, is. And that tells you something about your emotional state. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether the relationship is healthy. The same principle applies to women. A woman can feel an incredible attraction to a man and still know that he isn't good for her. Human beings are not machines. We can want something and reject it at the same time. We can be attracted and afraid. We can love someone and know that we need to leave. That's why relationships are so psychologically fascinating. There are contradictions everywhere. And if you try to reduce them to simple rules, you'll constantly be disappointed. Now, there's something else I think men should understand. Never punish someone for not giving you what you want. This sounds obvious, But you see it everywhere. A woman says no, the man becomes insulting. She doesn't respond. He becomes angry. She loses interest. He suddenly becomes cold and tries to make her jealous. This isn't power, it's wounded ego. Real confidence can accept a boundary. If someone doesn't want you, you don't need to destroy their opinion of you. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove that they made a mistake. You simply move on. And strangely enough, the ability to move on is one of the things that gives you the freedom to connect authentically in the first place. Because when you know you can walk away, you don't have to manipulate. You can be honest. You can say what you want. You can express interest. You can be vulnerable. And you can accept the answer. That is freedom. But there is a subtle distinction here. Walking away doesn't mean giving up the moment something becomes difficult. Every meaningful relationship contains resistance. There will be misunderstandings. There will be arguments. There will be moments when one person doesn't understand the other. The question is not whether there is resistance. The question is what kind of resistance it is. Healthy resistance can be worked through. Disrespect is different. Manipulation is different. Contempt is different. Repeated betrayal is different. And if you can't distinguish temporary difficulty from fundamental incompatibility, you will either leave relationships that could have become beautiful or remain in relationships that are slowly destroying you. This is why emotional intelligence matters more than most people realize. You have to learn to read patterns, not isolated moments. Patterns. One bad day means almost nothing. A consistent pattern means everything. And this brings us back to listening. When you really listen to someone, you start noticing patterns. You hear what they say, but you also notice what they avoid. You notice what makes them emotional. You notice what they become defensive about. You notice what they repeatedly complain about. You notice what they admire in other people. You notice what they envy. You notice what they fear losing. These things tell you much more about someone's psychology than a list of questions ever could. And you don't need to interrogate them. You simply pay attention. People reveal themselves constantly. The problem is that most of us are too busy preparing our own response to notice. And there's another reason listening is so powerful. It allows you to stop projecting. If you don't listen, you fill the gaps with your imagination. You think you know what someone means. You think you know why they behaved a certain way. You think you know what they're feeling. And then you react to your own fantasy. This happens constantly in relationships. A man sees his girlfriend talking to another man. His mind creates an entire story. She likes him. She's losing interest. She's probably hiding something. And suddenly he's angry. But nothing actually happened. He reacted to a movie inside his head. Jealousy often works this way. It's not always about what the other person is doing. It's about the story you tell yourself about what they're doing. And if you cannot control that story, you become emotionally controlled by circumstances you haven't even verified. This is why self-awareness is so important. When you feel jealousy, don't immediately accuse. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Am I seeing reality, or am I filling in the blanks? Has this person actually violated my trust? Or am I reacting to an old wound? That's a much more powerful approach. Because once you understand yourself, you become much harder to manipulate. And this works in both directions. Someone who understands their own emotional triggers is less likely to be controlled by another person's behavior. They don't react automatically. They pause, they observe, they choose. That pause is power. There is a moment between what happens and what you do about it. Most people never use that moment. They receive a text and immediately respond. They feel insulted and immediately attack. They feel rejected and immediately chase. They feel jealous and immediately accuse. But if you can create even a few seconds of psychological distance, you regain choice. You stop being a puppet of your emotions. And that is one of the central principles of power in human relationships. Never give another person complete control over your emotional state. They can influence you. Of course, you love them, you care about them, but they shouldn't be able to destroy your entire day with a sentence. That's emotional dependency, and emotional dependency creates fear. Fear creates control. Control creates resentment. And resentment eventually destroys intimacy. The healthiest relationships have influence without domination. You matter to each other, but neither person owns the other. This is why I don't think the goal should be to become impossible to hurt. That's unrealistic. If you love someone, they can hurt you. That's part of the risk. The goal is to become resilient enough that being hurt doesn't destroy your identity. You can experience pain and still remain yourself. You can lose someone and still have a life. You can be rejected and still respect yourself. You can be disappointed and still continue moving forward. That is emotional strength. And perhaps the strangest thing about attraction is that people often become more attractive when they stop trying to become attractive. Think about it. The person who desperately wants everyone to like them is exhausting. The person who can comfortably disagree is interesting. The person who constantly seeks approval becomes predictable. The person who has their own opinions has dimension. The person who is always available can sometimes feel like they have nowhere else to go. The person who has a full life feels alive. Again, this isn't about playing games. It's about actually having a life. If you have purpose, you naturally have boundaries. If you have interests, you naturally have things to talk about. If you have friendships, you don't become completely dependent on one person. If you have solitude, you become comfortable with yourself. And if you're comfortable with yourself, you don't need to constantly perform. This is why I keep coming back to purpose, because seduction without purpose can become obsession. A man who has nothing meaningful to work toward can spend 10 hours analyzing a woman's text. A man who is deeply involved in his life's work doesn't have the same psychological vacuum. He has something larger to return to. That doesn't mean he cares less. It means his identity is larger than the relationship. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts you can give someone. Don't make them responsible for your entire happiness. Give them the freedom to be your partner rather than your emotional lifeline. There is a beautiful paradox here. The less you need another person to complete you, the more freely you can love them. Because you're no longer saying, make me whole. You're saying, I am whole and I want to share this life with you. That's a completely different relationship. And maybe this is what people mean when they talk about mature love. It's not less passionate, it's deeper. You still feel attraction, you still feel excitement. You still miss the person, you still want them, but underneath the desire there is respect, there is friendship, there is admiration, there is intellectual connection, there is emotional safety, there is a willingness to grow, and there is something else that is often forgotten. You actually like the person, not just their appearance, not just the way they make you feel, not just the attention they give you. You like their mind, their humor, their character, their way of seeing the world, their imperfections, their strange little habits. You enjoy being around them even when nothing romantic is happening. That's a much stronger foundation because physical attraction can fluctuate. Novelty fades, the initial intensity changes, but genuine curiosity about another person's mind can continue for decades. And that's where seduction becomes something much more profound than getting someone into bed. It becomes the art of remaining interesting to one another. You continue discovering each other. You continue asking questions. You continue surprising each other. You continue growing. Because the person you married 10 years ago isn't exactly the same person today. Neither are you, so you have to keep meeting each other again. That's what many relationships fail to do. They fall in love with an earlier version of each other and then become angry when the person changes. But people are supposed to change. The question is whether you can change together. And this is where the idea of mastery comes back. Mastery isn't about reaching some final state where you've figured everything out. It's about developing the ability to keep learning. The same is true of relationships. You never completely master another person. You learn them, then they change. So you learn them again. And perhaps that is what makes long-term intimacy so extraordinary. You have the opportunity to know someone deeply without ever completely exhausting their mystery. You see their history, their fears, their ambitions, their weaknesses, their contradictions, and yet there are still things you don't know. There is still discovery. There is still surprise. There is still life, and that is very different from possession. Possession says, I know you. Love says, I'm still interested in knowing you. That's the distinction. So if you really want to understand women, don't start by studying tricks. Study human nature. Study yourself. Watch your own reactions. Notice your insecurities. Learn to listen. Learn to tolerate rejection. Learn to tolerate uncertainty. Develop your purpose. Build a life that doesn't depend on someone's approval. Become generous with attention without becoming desperate for attention in return. And most importantly, learn to see the person in front of you instead of seeing your fantasy of them. Because once you can actually see someone, you gain something much more valuable than the ability to seduce them. You gain the ability to decide. You can decide whether you want them. You can decide whether you trust them. You can decide whether your values fit. You can decide whether the relationship makes you stronger or weaker. And you can decide when it's time to leave. That is the real freedom. And when you have that freedom, you stop approaching relationships from a position of fear. You don't think, what if she leaves? You think, if she stays, we will build something beautiful. If she leaves, I will survive. And either way, I will remain myself. That is when you stop losing, not because you learned how to control women, but because you stopped needing to control anyone. You learned how to control the only person you ever truly had control over, yourself. And once you understand that, attraction becomes much simpler. You don't chase, you don't manipulate, you don't pretend, you don't beg, you don't punish, you don't perform. You show up, you listen, you observe, you express what you feel, you accept what comes back, and you keep moving toward the life that belongs to you. Because ultimately, the strongest man isn't the one who can make every woman want him. It's the man who can deeply desire one person without becoming her prisoner. He can love without losing himself. He can walk away without hatred. He can stay without fear. And he can look at another human being and say, I don't want to possess you. I want to know you. That is where real connection begins. And perhaps that's the thing about women that men spend their entire lives trying to understand. The secret isn't hidden inside women. It's hidden inside human nature. And once you understand yourself deeply enough to stop needing another person to validate your existence, you become capable of something far more powerful than seduction. You become capable of genuine intimacy. And that is something no technique can manufacture.